Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Today is the third and final installment of my sort of hoopla around Murder on the Orient Express. Now, I've been reading all of the Hercule Poirot novels in roughly order of publication as a part of my Project Poirot. So the first video was the Murder on the Orient Express sort of as an entry in that project, which I'll have linked if you want to check that out. And then after that, I've always been a huge fan of the actual original adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express from the 70s, starring Albert Finney and Ingrid Bergman and Sean Connery, all those folks. So then I did a book or movie comparing the book and the movie, the original movie. And I've been doing all of this in anticipation of seeing the newly adapted version of Murder on the Orient Express, which was released yesterday when I'm filming this. It was on November 10th, and I went last night to see it with a friend of mine. So this final video is basically going to be my thoughts about how that adaptation did. And I think just to give some sort of shape to this conversation, I'm gonna just compare it to the other adaptation, which if you watch that second video, you'll know I think is one of the best adaptations I've seen. I think it does a great job of being really faithful to its source material in a constructive way. It doesn't invent needless things that don't need to be invented, but it also takes a few liberties here and there in a way that I think kind of enhances the original material, which to me is the whole point of doing an adaptation. So rather than trying to compare, this is going to be a little tricky because I'm going to inevitably have to compare this new movie to the book to some degree, but I'm going to try to focus just on, okay, we have these two, the same medium, so they're using the same source material and they have the same medium. How do these compare? So let's start with some of the things that I think that the new adaptation maybe does a little bit better than the original. And also, I'll let you guys know when we get to spoilers. So right now we are spoiler free. I will let you know when we come to spoilers, and I'll put a timestamp and everything on the screen so that you're really clear that you're about to be spoiled. But for right now, we'll stick to being spoiler free. So things that I think that the new adaptation probably does a little bit better than the old adaptation. One thing I thought was definitely a positive step was that instead of having some of this sort of colonialism and xenophobia be subtext the way that it is in the book, certainly, but really not so much at all in the movie. Maybe a little bit, but in the original adaptation, they don't really touch on some of the kind of context of the fact that this is taking place in a Middle Eastern country, basically, or, it is a locale, an exotic locale, that is populated by native people, not white people. I thought that the new adaptation with Kenneth Branagh, who is both the Poirot in this movie, he also, it turns out, directed it, which we'll come back to later. But anyway, in this adaptation, I do like that they kind of address that subtext head on, right? So they show native peoples in a way that is not problematic to the same degree that the original did. Really, the natives that were shown in the original adaptation are shown as basically poor beggars or thieves. And I liked that this adaptation was a lot more sympathetic to the fact that just because this is not a predominantly white country doesn't mean that it's full of people who are trying to steal from white people. And I just did think it was interesting that they overtly address race a number of times. They cast the role that's originally Colonel Abernathy, which was Sean Connery in the original adaptation, as he's the guy from Hamilton, Leslie Odom, right? So essentially, instead of having a white Scottish actor, we now have an African-American playing that main role of Colonel Abernathy, but in the adaptation, he's now a doctor. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of switch up, and they also switched out the Italian character from the original adaptation with a Hispanic character. And there's a lot of overt discussion of race. Now, again, I think that this is going beyond the scope of what the book necessarily supports, but I certainly think that any contemporary reader reading back into that story, it's very fair to ask some questions about kind of race and colonialism. So anyway, all that to say, they did a number of changes in that respect, and I actually liked those. I thought that was sort of an interesting kind of take on, it was a point of view, basically, and I appreciated that they had a point of view. It felt a little kind of PC smug at points, but you know what, progress is done in baby steps, and anytime that we're seeing more representation and more discussion about things like race, I think it's for the best in general. So I liked that. I also liked that because clearly they had more budget and or CGI access in this movie, you definitely got more of a sense of like overall place than you do in the original adaptation. Now, I think that the original adaptation kind of makes that work for the movie. It makes it feel kind of claustrophobic and very luxurious within this claustrophobic setting, in a way that I think actually works. But it was interesting to see this new adaptation have much more, like you see more of like, they go to Jerusalem, we'll get to that. They, you know, have like more kind of landscapes of Istanbul. You see the train like running through the snowy mountains and everything, and it was cool to see kind of just like a bigger view of the world that they're telling. And they, you know, I also felt like they did a pretty good job of being pretty faithful in terms of like costumes, all of that I thought was really nicely done. I think they did a good job with like the set. I mean, all of the kind of like visual pieces I thought were pretty well done. And then the third thing that I think this movie does better than the adaptation, or not better, but it's just something I liked as in comparison with the adaptation, is that the Countess Andreni definitely has her rightful spotlight on her, more so in this adaptation than in the original. Because if you read the book, and this is an aspect that I think is more faithful to the book, even though the way they portray her is not the same, I think that they make her much more of a character. Like, she has a lot more presence in this movie. And if you read the book, she has a much bigger role to play in the book than she did in the original adaptation. In that respect, I think the original adaptation is a wee bit sexist, but whatever. It was the 70s. So I liked that. I like that the movie, this version of the movie, like the new one, kind of brings some of that back to the plot. Now for the things that I did not like, and again, I will let you know when we get to spoilers. I'm going to start with some spoilery type things. This movie was not good. So I say that. Part of why I wanted to go with a friend of mine was because I wanted somebody who was unbiased sort of take on things, and I think it was an enjoyable movie. Like, if you just went for some fun at the theater, like, you're gonna have fun. It's a good movie. And in her words, she was like, I liked it. It's not gonna win any Academy Awards, but it was good. And I think that that's probably a fair summation of this movie. And in that respect, of course it's inferior to the original, because the original did win Academy Awards, and the original was like true, in my opinion, true like art, and this movie is just not that. And part of why it is not that is because the sort of angle that they have taken on the story is that they have tried to make it an action-adventure movie. And this is, like, I just think that this is a fundamental mismatch of attempted genre with the source material, because the source material just doesn't really lend itself well to that. A comparison, I think a very good comparison here would be what I was saying in my second video about how I think when Peter Jackson tried to take like the epic war genre and apply it to The Hobbit, it just didn't work. Like, the source material doesn't support it. The way it did work for Lord of the Rings, it just didn't for The Hobbit. This is the situation we are in with this movie. The action-adventure paradigm does not suit the source material. They're trying to make Poirot into, like, some sort of action hero, and he, in the book, and, like, I think what the source material indicates, and even what they're characterizing him as, is, like, a fat little old man. Like, he's not chasing people. He's not, like, hitting people with his fancy cane. That's just, like, that's not really what the book is about. And the reason I am particularly annoyed by this is I feel like it's really underselling your audience's intelligence, because I think that they felt like, well, audiences won't just want to sit here and watch a whodunit. Well, sweetheart, mysteries are, aside from romances, are the #1 selling genre out there. People like whodunits. Like, you don't need to jazz it up with a lot of, like, flashy action stuff. Like, that's not adding anything. And again, I feel like it's sort of insulting to the audience, because I think that they felt like we would get bored if they didn't add that, and I just don't think that that's the case. They also really try to make Poirot like this, like, wounded, like, world-weary guy, and again, I just don't think that that's a very smart take on who Poirot is. Poirot is not angsty. Like, Poirot is quite arrogant and pretty damn pleased with himself. Like, he doesn't have any, like, tortured elements over his gift of detection. That's just not like, I don't think that that's any value add to that character, and to me, it really undermines the Poirot character in general, because, yes, he does have, like, a soft romantic heart in the core of him, but they do a few things that I think are just, and I'll get to that in the spoilery part, but, like, they do a few things with the character of Poirot that, again, I just think that we didn't need it, and it feels like they're just trying to, like, flesh out a character who already has interesting things happening with him and didn't need that kind of fleshing out. I also think that they just don't do as elegant of a job as the original movie did in sort of like stage management. And what I mean by that is in the original movie, you're in a claustrophobic space, but they find ways to kind of move you through that space in a way that feels dynamic but not forced, whereas in this adaptation, they very clearly are trying to find new sets to shoot in, and they just have Poirot like moving around very arbitrarily. I wasn't a big fan of how they sort of moved you through space. It felt quite clunky to me, and I felt quite jarred by how they were doing it, basically. So now we have come to the spoilery part of this video, so warning right now, you're gonna get a few spoilers. If you know how the original book goes, or if you've seen the original movie, nothing here is gonna surprise you, but like, if you have never encountered this story in any form before, please stop watching, because or like go to the end of the video. I'll tell you below where you can go, but it's worth being surprised for how this book wraps up. Spoilers, 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 spoilers. In the book and in the original adaptation, I'm not going to say that he immediately knows what happened, but he is moving forward in his investigation in a pretty systematic way, and I don't recall, at least, him having any real doubts that he's going to figure this out. In this adaptation, again, because they're so committed to making Poirot this weird, like, angsty hero, like, he has this fictitious old love named Catherine, and he just, like, stares at her picture and, like, monologues at it all the time in a weird, like, because they're wanting to, I guess, create, like, inner doubts within him, they feel the need to have him just, like, constantly be unsure if he's gonna solve this. They don't have him, he's not as like cocky and confident in his like moving towards the solution as he is in the book. And then they have this weird diversion where Colonel Abernathy, who again is a doctor for reasons, like I don't know why they changed up a few of the people's like professions or backstories in ways that I thought were basically pointless. But when Colonel Abernathy, Dr. Abernathy, like he literally shoots Poirot because Poirot is accusing Mary Debenham of doing it. And so Dr. Abernathy comes in and shoots Poirot, and then Poirot has his epiphany or whatever. He confronts them all out in the snow because we had to get out of the train, I guess. And like the way that confrontation goes down is so bizarre. I think it's meant to feel very like emotional, but it feels so melodramatic, the way it's staged, the way it's acted. And then so he basically then, so he confronts them with what he knows is the truth. He puts a gun on the table and says, I can't lie to the police, so one of you needs to shoot me because I won't be able to lie. But basically he's saying like, I get why you did this and I want you all to get away with it, so like, kill me instead. And then Michelle Pfeiffer, who's playing Mrs. Hubbard, like grabs the gun and then tries to kill herself, but the gun is empty. It's just so over dramatic, and I feel like, again, it felt like they didn't trust the audience to go along with the undercurrents of emotion that are already baked into the narrative. And I just felt like the ending really, really let me down as in comparison with the book, because then, so he, I guess, like sleeps on it at night, and then the next morning it's just like, JK, I've made my peace with this, I'm just gonna go tell the police that the easier solution is true. Like, it felt like they were constantly undercutting the emotions they were trying to build, and I just felt like the ending in particular was really unsuccessful. Okay, so spoilers are over. So welcome back to those of you who skipped ahead. So basically, my problem with this movie is that I think that there's one key element here that created a lot of these problems. The actor who is playing Poirot was also directing, and I know he didn't write the screenplay, but I think that the kind of indulgence of the Poirot character has to in part trace to that. And I just don't think that this was a very successful adaptation. It's not one that I would necessarily recommend. I say that I want everyone to see it because I want them to make more adaptations of Agatha Christie, because it keeps her name fresh in people's minds and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of like what do I think that this is like a good adaptation? No. Do I think that it's a terrible way to spend a couple of hours in the theater? No. Like, I think it was pretty enjoyable. It was a fine, like, over Thanksgiving, you need to find something most of the family is going to be okay with. Like, this is, as long as they're okay with a couple of, like, stabby things, I think that this is a perfectly respectable, like, entertainment type movie. It's just not as good as the original adaptation by a long shot, even though it has a ton, like the original adaptation, it has a ton of great actors in it. So it's even more surprising to me that it wasn't that great, because, I mean, you have, like, you know, like Judi Dench and Michelle Pfeiffer and, you know, Johnny Depp and Kenneth Branagh and Penelope Cruz, like all of these really like pretty solid actors. And it just doesn't come together, in my opinion. I would say that the standout is whoever plays Mary Debenham, and I forgot to look up who that was, but I thought she was probably the best performance. And maybe Dr. Abernathy, I thought he was pretty good too. Willem Dafoe not doing his best work in this one, I'll tell you. All that to say, I clearly didn't love this, and if I'm ranking like the properties surrounding this material, clearly the book is my favorite. Then I'd say the adaptation is like very close behind that book, and then the original adaptation, then this new adaptation is like pretty far down. Like, I prefer probably like the David Suchet version of this to this new adaptation. Sorry about it. That being said, if you've also seen this or are planning to see it, I would love to know kind of like your thoughts. If you've seen it, did you kind of feel the way I did in terms of it being a little bit lackluster? Did you feel, you know, like I'm totally wrong, that they like had some great insight that I just missed when I was watching it? Let me know your thoughts below. Yeah, I'm sad that I didn't like this more, but like I said, I'm always glad when Agatha Christie has things happening in the news, because then more people are reading her, and hopefully that like stirs interest in her work. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all of that information listed in the description box below. So I think that'll do it. I don't think I have anything else I need to tell you guys. So this is the third in my 3 Murder on the Orient Express videos. I've had a really good time kind of looking at this book more closely, and yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed it too. I hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful week, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!